40% of the people who are homeless, who are older than 50 years old, became homeless after they were 50. That's an American tragedy that's growing.
We're talking about the chronically homeless men and women that you see under our bridges or street corners, the most despised, outcast, lost, and forgotten of our community.
When I see someone that's homeless, I always wonder what the backstory is that led to where they are.
People are hurting. They're really hurting. Not only are they hurting, they're lost.
I was praying for death every day. I knew there was no way out.
Homelessness is one of those conversations that feels one way when you're just talking about an issue, and then it feels totally different when you say, that's my friend. What in the world happened?
I was not all the labels that they were putting on me. I was just a woman out in the world alone, and I just had a broken heart.
Hello and welcome to American Stories. I'm Saida Pagan. In America today, there are few issues more pressing than the problem of homelessness. And while millions are impacted, solutions are far too few to this problem. There is a new movie and documentary being released in 2024 that will hopefully help us all better understand homelessness and find ways to end it. Our guest for this episode is Dr. Robert G. Marbut Jr., who is the executive producer of a feature film titled No Address. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Marbut.
Thank you so much for having us. And more importantly, thank you for your interest in the topic of homelessness.
Absolutely. Let's begin with the movie. I know there's a documentary, there's a book, there's an interactive study guide. There's so much that your production company has produced. But tell us, how does the movie tackle the issue of homelessness?
Well, we have 5 different products, and they all sort of have different messages for different groups. And for the main movie, or the theatrical release movie that stars Billy Baldwin and Beverly D'Angelo and Xander Berkeley and Ashanti, the main purpose of that is to raise general awareness for the general public, if you will, the country, and to fully understand that homelessness is not a one-size-fits-all. A lot of people think about homelessness only as that person you see under a bridge or, at a street corner panhandling. And so we go into the many types of homelessness in the movie. And so we're trying to raise awareness, but also start talking about some solutions, which we include some of that in the theatrical No Address movie.
Now, it is a scripted sort of film, an actual theatrically released film. So what is the storyline without giving anything away?
Well, Julia Verdine is our fabulous screenwriter, and she has several different storylines that all converge into a family, we call a street level family or a street family, joining together on the street to try to survive on the street. And what's interesting about it, and what's very accurate in the real life, they all get there different ways. They're different paths to homelessness. So she covers one person is a fostering out, another is a post-traumatic stress vet, another is a person dealing with substance abuse and mental illness. And so she brings all those characters into a family on how to survive. And then after that, she'll shoot me if I just start giving away details of the storyline. But it's a very rich drama and it's also incredibly accurate at the same time about the different types of homelessness.
Now, which came first, the documentary or the feature film, the concept?
The feature film was always the original plan of Robert Craig Films. And then as we started to try to talk about how do you make the feature film so accurate, and that was how I got brought in initially was sort of an authenticator, to make sure the script is authentic and real world and things that really do happen. And as part of that process, we started getting film and B-roll. That was for the main movie. But then we realized we had so much there that we were able to make that into its own documentary. And I had always wanted to do a documentary on homelessness from my prior work. I just thought that was very important, that there's so much either lack of information or poor information, especially with policymakers. And so the documentary is really addressed much more toward thought leaders, politicians, elected officials, government officials, city administrators. So that's the documentary, whereas the theatrical movie is for the general public and much more of a traditional drama in the theater type of movie.
How did you get involved and what's your background that led to your being the executive producer of these two films?
Well, I've been involved in homelessness for about 40 years now, starting in high school in a church youth group that then morphed into being a full-time volunteer. And then I was later Mayor Pro Tem of San Antonio and worked for President Bush, the father. And in both those roles, I did a lot with homelessness. And then later, I was the founding president of Haven for Hope, which is the largest transformational center in the United States. And any one night, we have about 2,500 people there. And then that later led to me becoming the technical title as executive director of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, which is in essence the White House federal homelessness czar, as the way Ronald Reagan called it. And so my job was to consult with the White House, the Senate, the House on what should be the federal response to homelessness. So that's my most recent job before I got into helping with these two movies.
Well, tell us, how has it evolved and how have we gotten to this point? I remember as a little girl growing up in New York City, we saw a little bit of it in certain parts of Manhattan where I grew up. But now I'm living in Los Angeles and it is totally out of control. And I know that people who live in other urban areas and even maybe some, smaller towns are seeing it across America. So walk us through it, if you will. How did it get to this point?
Well, when we talk about street level homelessness, which is 2 of the 10 federal definitions of homelessness, and that's important to understand that HUD has 5 definitions and Department of Education has 5. But street level homelessness, which is a lot of what our documentary is about, a lot about what our movie's about, and what people see out their windows and what the politicians are talking about, what's on the nightly news everywhere. So in terms of street level homelessness, there are really 2 inflection points that really got us to the mess we're in. One is back in the 60s and then in the 80s, there was a move to deinstitutionalize the mental health asylums across the United States, or the mental health hospitals. And on one side, you had people watching When It Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and thought it was a documentary and thought we should get out of that, stop deinstitutionalize. And on the other side, a lot of people felt that's not the role of government to be paying for mental health, behavioral health beds. And so both in the 60s and then later in the 80s, the mental health beds were cut, and the government subsidized mental health beds, which was about 500,000 beds in 1950, are now only about 20 or 30,000 beds. So where do 470,000 people go? The street, the jails, emergency rooms. The other big sort of inflection point was in 2013. The federal government needed more money for housing vouchers, so they cannibalized treatment. They said, we're no longer going to do mental health treatment, substance use disorders, and job training. We're going to take all that money and we're going to put it into housing vouchers, and we're going to give more housing vouchers out, but we're not going to treat. And that's the real devastating blow. And it really is the medical equivalent of you or I having a heart attack and getting transported by EMS to the emergency room, and we just sit in the waiting room. We have a roof over our head, but we get no treatment for our heart attack. Nobody does our blood work. Nobody puts us on an EKG. Nobody checks and see if we have a blockage. We don't have any, MRIs of our heart. And we just hope you recover because you're hanging out in the ER. You got a roof over your head, but you're getting no treatment. You're not seeing doctors. You're not seeing nurses. You're not getting any, intervention of surgery or medications. And that's what's happened to homelessness since 2013. And that's why, in particular, California has seen this huge escalation, because not only did the federal government's money do that, but the state of California, which spends a lot of money, and LA County and LA City, they've all put it into vouchers with no treatment. And that's literally the equivalent of people having strokes and heart attacks and saying, well, we'll take you to the ER, but we'll give you no treatment and expect you to deal and to live and to successfully address your stroke or your heart attack in a healthy way. And that's silly. It's folly. And so it really is a bad policy that has led to this huge growth over the last 10 years.
Have there been screenings thus far? Is everything complete, the documentary and the film thus far?
The documentary is fully complete. We call it locked, and so it is locked. We've had some private screenings internally with people who help develop the movie and show, so they can see it and, get feedback and such. And hopefully in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we'll have the movie locked. And, as so many production houses had to deal with the 2 strikes that occurred, that put sort of everything, got put on hold, but we're back on track. And we hope to have streaming of the documentary late summer, early fall. And then with the theatrical release, hopefully it'll be fall for the full theatrical release.
What has been the reaction thus far to this, the folks that have seen some part of this?
Well, the documentary, we've just had a lot of showings here in terms of these private screenings. And what is amazing, there's 2 parts in the movie where we sort of go from the facts and the substance and sort of how we get here, and then we really start focusing on people experiencing homeless and how do they get out of it. We sort of, show the problem, show how we got there, but then we start showing a couple dozen people and sort of walk through how do they get recovery, how do they get out of it. And there's one part where a lady up in Arkansas is interviewed, and that's when the tears start. And then in the last 9 minutes of the documentary, just people, we were in Washington, D.C., and a pretty high up former federal official, both for Democrat and Republican, he was very stoic and trying not to cry, and he had his then pulls out his handkerchief, and people get real teary in the last 9 minutes of the movie. It really hits home, and not just not just an emotional hitting home, because any of us could end up in their place. I mean, many people in America are not far from being homeless or experiencing homelessness themselves. Or what's really striking is how many family members I meet and they go, oh, my brother, my son, my ex-wife, my daughter's boyfriend. It's almost 3 million adults and children experiencing all 10 types of homelessness in America. And to me, it's mind-boggling that our country is sort of come to a point that, for lack of a better word, we tolerate or put up with or accept that 1.5 million children in America are experiencing homelessness. And to me, this is an existential threat to our country. We've lost cities. San Francisco's a lost city. Portland's a lost city. Parts of Los Angeles, where you're from, are lost. And not all of LA is lost, but if changes aren't made, we can start to look at the future of America as San Francisco and Portland. And when you start to realize that Honolulu is starting to have problems, Seattle is struggling with this, New York is struggling, Atlanta, Chicago, but they're places like small towns in like Grand Rapids, Michigan. I think it was the Wall Street Journal who did an in-depth story about it's not just these mega cities anymore. It is middle of America is dealing with this. And where it got exacerbated about 4 years ago was when fentanyl hit the streets. And fentanyl, when the federal government in 2013 decides we're not going to treat untreated mental illness and substance abuse on the street, that's a bad mistake. You can see how that puts us on a bad trajectory. But when you add in fentanyl hitting the street and you're saying we're not going to treat substance abuse, but the most powerful drug ever known to mankind is humankind has hit the street, called fentanyl. In many ways, fentanyl should come with the death certificate. It is so powerful and so dangerous. And if we don't get back to what we knew worked, which is treatment and recovery, if we don't get back to really focusing on that, all our major cities in America will start to look like Portland and San Francisco. And I don't think there's anybody who wants that.
So what are the solutions? What do the films, what is the message of the film, the documentary, and then we're going to talk about the book and the interactive study guide.
Well, the message is recovery works, and to get recovery is treatment. And you can't arrest your way out. On one side, some groups would like to arrest your way out, and it doesn't work, especially if you don't have treatment beds on one side. And then on the other side is if you just let people hang out in a park bench, you don't get recovery there. I know with metaphysical certainty, I know nobody has recovered hanging out under a park bench or sleeping on a park bench or going to jail. Neither places have treatment systems that work. Treatment works when you're in a 24/7 program like the Salvation Army or the City Gate Rescue Missions or a Haven for Hope in San Antonio or Alva Chapman in Miami. Those programs work. So we got to get back to that. That's the most important thing you have to do. And everything else, candidly, is gimmicks. I know so many elected officials who I just want to try one little thing or a high profile thing or something that doesn't cost much money, or it's a quick fix. None of those work. We got into this mess over a 25-year period, and we're not going to get out overnight. But we got to change our course, or we're going to be worse. Street homelessness now is doubling every 5 to 6 years. And so look out your window and say, it's a mess, but it's going to be twice as bad as it is now in 5 years. That's when people need to start saying, we got to do something different now, like right away. And we can't sit and talk about it anymore. We know this is not working. You know, we've tried this crazy idea of putting it all in the vouchers and no treatment. It hasn't worked.
Let us turn the topic of our conversation to Robert Craig. This is a Robert Craig film. Tell us about Robert Craig. Who is he and how did this all come about?
Well, he's the founder of Gutter Glove, one of and he has, I think, 28 inventions. And so he became a very successful business person. And he's always wanted to do, I call them cause movies or movies with the mission and, movies that have impact, social impact. And he started out, his big step into this is with homelessness. And he became so committed to it. And that's how we ended up with the 5 different products. It's not just one movie. We got a movie, a documentary, a novel, a soundtrack, and then we have the interactive study guide. And so he's fully committed to really trying to get the entire country to rethink how we deal with homelessness, to change our course and to start radically reducing homelessness around the country. And he's deeply committed to it. And it's so exciting to be involved with such a gentleman with such a great heart who really wants to make an impact in a very practical and applied way.
Tell us about the book. Has it been published? Is it available at this
The
point?
not the novel will come out with the movie, or probably shortly before the movie in the fall. And the interactive study guide, and we all brand it's everything's co-branded, and so no address, the interactive study guide that came out in March, and that's for like small groups, faith groups. It could even be used for an Optimist group or a Rotary group, and it provides you very practical steps of how to address homelessness. And candidly, a lot of what nonprofit groups, faith groups, small groups do sometimes make things worse. And so we want to talk about how can you funnel those efforts in a very, sort of intentional way, having your heart and your brain work at the same time, and be really have a very thoughtful response that really makes a change in your local community. So that's the purpose of the interactive study group, is real mechanical. Like literally, we go through where it's designed for 4 weeks in a row or a month, and it goes through how do you start, how do you define your local problem, how do you help, and we got a lot of real practical techniques. How do you cooperate versus compete with another nonprofit? How do you move from enabling behavior to engaging behavior? And I know a lot of people are well-intentioned, but if you go give sandwiches out in a park, that does nothing but keep homelessness going. And that's hard to hear, because people are well-intended and want to do something. Instead of giving sandwiches in a park, go find your best homelessness service facility in your community, a Salvation Army, a rescue mission, an independent group, a secular group, and go help them. Go. Instead of give sandwiches in a park, go help them make sandwiches inside their facility, help volunteer, because that's where treatment and recovery occurs.
This is the first that I personally have heard about some group or some individual trying to start a really solid national conversation and a national movement. Am I correct? Has this been done before?
Never been done before. And when I introduce it at screenings, I call it, we have an audacious goal. And if you go literally look in the dictionary what audacious goal means, it is an audacious goal. We want to really get United States to rethink this as a collective, as individuals and a collective, and we should all be working together. This is one of those issues that shouldn't be polarizing. It shouldn't be Republican, Democrat, left, right, conservative, liberal. It should be a common sense approach to how to address this. And what I do know is if we don't radically make changes like immediately, we are going to all end up looking like San Francisco and Portland. This is, the bad is already happening. You see it in LA. Not all LA is lost, but many parts are. Seattle has had many problems. They seem to be the one city starting to make the turn on the West Coast. And you got places like Honolulu, major parts of Honolulu are lost. And who would have ever thought an island of Honolulu would have such problems? And so we are seeing the future, and it is not good. And so the question is, do you want to change? We talk a lot about in the documentary, Johns Hopkins University. We give this example of Johns Hopkins University Medical Center, a secular, collegiate, one of the best medical operations in the world, joining with a rescue mission. And they actually put a mission inside the rescue mission, and it is having phenomenal success. And so we have the both those individuals who led that effort, as a person of secular science and medicine, with a person of faith and conviction in terms of running a facility, and how they work together to do that. We show small places like Fort Smith, Arkansas, that used to have a 4-mile long encampment. And when we arrived there and shot, we saw one tent. Literally, it was a 4-mile long encampment. When we shot, we droned the whole thing, and we found one tent where it used to be. And so if you can be successful in Baltimore, if you can be successful in Fort Smith, Arkansas, if you can be successful in San Antonio, we know how to do that. And so our movie sort of shows, here's some lost cities, and here's some cities and communities that are doing it. Which does your community want to be?
Have you gotten any reaction yet from elected officials, the people that can really do something and change policy?
Yes, and they've been coming to some of the screenings, and the interactive study guide has been out. And so a lot of people, we're getting people to rethink things. That's where we are right now, is sort of that rethinking. All right, what we're doing now is not working, so it's time to rethink it. I think it's still too quick to sort of see electeds make that change. And I come out of that world. I've worked in the White House and 3 different administrations on payroll. I've helped 2 or 3 other administrations, as a volunteer. And I'm a former elected mayor pro tem of San Antonio. And a lot of time politicians need the society, or need the voters, or need the citizens to change before they start to change. I wish that was not the case, but that's often the case in some communities. Likewise, there's some communities. I've been dealing down in a small city in South Texas, Laredo, and there's one councilwoman, Figueroa, who's led the way. I mean, she's the one who inspired everybody to join her in this movement, and they're well on their way to addressing it. And that's a border small city, but one elected official's leading the way there. So in some cases, elected officials are already making that change, but not everywhere yet. In a lot of places, the community frustration level is boiling up, and they're waiting for the elected officials to make those changes.
Now, if people would like to see the movie, the documentary, tell us about the release dates, where they would be able to view these films.
So the interactive study guide came out in March, and you can get that on Amazon, and you just go no address interactive study guide, or no address Robert Marbut. It pops up, and you'll see it, and you can order that today. The documentary will be streaming late summer, early fall, probably closer to early fall. And then the theatrical movie will probably be fall time. And I always remind everybody, remember we had 2 major Hollywood strikes that only ended about 100 days ago. And so everybody's like, well, when do you come to release it? Well, it takes a while to go through post-production and distribution and such. So that's where we are. And we're excited that they'll both be out by fall at the rate we're going now.
Well, I want to thank you so much for the tremendous work that you're doing to try to end this very pressing problem for America.
Well, thank you so much for having us on. But again, most importantly, thank you for caring about this issue and bringing awareness to it.
And thank you for joining us for this edition of American Stories. I'm Saida Pagan.
And you gotta allow me to do it. You never look down on a human being unless you're trying to lift them up.